I'm going to put the release lever back on the shutter now, so I'm just going to wipe a little bit of molybdenum paste through the pivot of that. I'm looking where that, of course that goes here, doesn't it? So it's return spring. So the lever fits like this. The return spring fits underneath, and the return spring must fit here. And I think it probably fits. Let's try it there. I'm not sure whether it's which side of this post it's on. Will it sit there? Will it sit there? Let's get my lever in place. Bring that over to the edge of my all-purpose handy wooden block. Put the pivot screw in place. No, it's not finding the hole. Why not? Oh, it's just awkwardly placed. Let's try that again. I can't get that to sit square, I'm not sure why. No, I'm going to swap hands, rotate this, come in from the other side. At least I can hold it in place with my... Where does that lever go? Oh, that goes on the inside, okay. Swing that lever out of the way then. That's better. Now I can probably get the screw in place. It's started now. That looks okay. Now can I hook this spring back over its post over here? That works. Feels a bit lackluster though. Okay, I can see I haven't got that spring where it needs to be. it needs to be right around here. Now I'll swing that round to its post. That's much more positive. So basically the problem there was that I had the tail of the spring underneath here on that rivet post there, which was incorrect. That rivet post catches against there, instead of having it back across the top here. I'm just checking that looks correct. Looking at the end of the spring to make sure that it extends through there far enough to stay there and that I've got it round the right way. That looks good. So that lever's correctly in position. That moves nice and smoothly, and I can get the other levers in position next. I'll put these levers back in place. You're best advised to take a couple of photos first so that you have a reference to go back to, so you can check where the lever's actually fitted and how the spring's fitted. There's my two levers, one goes on top of the other, and the spring goes here, and the pivot screw goes here. Now this spring here has to come around and hook around here. This end with the hook on it has to come around behind here. See if I can pick it up with my tweezers and swing it across. It's trying its best to get away. Oh, the other end's come unhooked now, and that's gone round the back where I can't easily get at it. Let's see if we can fish that out. Yeah, there it is. No, dropped it again. Alright, let's get that end. No, it's just a bit awkward. Swing that round, tuck it in there. That's better, that's tucked in correctly. Both ends are now where they should be. I'll check that that spring is correct. That's good. This is the cocked position. As the shutter is released, it moves down. The B lever here is allowed to drop in. It blocks the action of the main lever. As you release your finger from the shutter release, that pulls that lever away and allows the main cocking lever here to continue its action. So that's all working correctly there. And that's that part of the job done with the mechanism plate. Next I've got to clean and put back the blade actuating ring, which is in a pretty poor state. I'm going to have to clean that with some brass though, I think. It does look like verdigris or corrosion products. It might be grease. I'll just have a quick wipe of that with solvent and see if it actually cleans off. No, that is corrosion. The verdigris is wiping off, but I can see that that's corrosion down into the plating. This is a nickel plated part, of course. It appears that that corrosion goes down through the nickel plating. My main concern here is that it needs to be quite smooth. I don't want any roughness on that part, otherwise the shutter blades won't swing smoothly across it. As I clean this using naphtha, I can judge what that surface feels like through the cotton bud, and I can tell that it's not especially rough. It's nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be. I don't think that will cause me any trouble. So I need to clean up both surfaces of this blade actuating ring to remove any traces of grease. And of course, while I'm cleaning it, it sort of forces me to take great note of the condition of the part, and I would normally expect to notice if there was any serious corrosion problem, and I don't see one. So if I cock this mechanism plate, I've got to swing this back over. Of course its spring is unhooked now. I've got to get the return spring for that lever back in position. Fits round behind that rivet post there. I swing that out. I've got it tucked right up against the lens tube now, so that the post from the blade actuating ring will connect to it. No, it dropped back. That's it. Now the lever here is coupled to that pin. And that blade actuating ring is in position. I've just got to put my 5 washers and 5 screws back in to hold that together. See if I can get these washers and screws back in position. These washers, the washers overlap the edge of the blade actuating ring, and so hold it in position, stop it all falling apart. These washers all have some slight corrosion on the surface of them, but it's on one surface. I've cleaned them, and I'll put them the other way up so that the better side is facing the shutter blades. Some of these tiny washers you'll see have a piece of the edge knocked out of them. I don't think it's not significant. It's not a feature that was required for them to do their job. It's much more likely it's just an artifact of sloppy manufacturing. Just check all those screws, they're all good, and the mechanism plate fires correctly. It's quite common with a bare mechanism plate like this with no blades fitted and no retard gear train that the B lever does not fall into position quick enough to actually stop the shutter in the open position. If you retard it slightly by holding your finger on the cocking lever, the B lever is certainly seen to be working correctly. But if you just let it fly, it doesn't drop in quick enough to stop the action. There's our mechanism plate cleaned and ready at this stage to go back into the shutter case. But first I've got to clean these blades. And I've also got to deal with the shutter case and clean and reassemble the diaphragm mechanism in here. And that's my next task. So take note of the position of this plate here. It's held in place in this case with two small screws. Take note of how it fitted, because we've got to get this back in the same position. So I'll remove those screws. Or can I take the setting lever off the back first? Sometimes you can. Let's have a look. Yes, I've got access here, two screw heads. I can undo those screws and remove the setting lever from the back. Setting lever falls away. I'll take those two screws out, two shoulder screws. Now I can remove these two screws and tip the diaphragm mechanism completely out of the case. Now one of the screws flew away, sitting down here. The other one's under here. So all of these components need to be cleaned carefully. They're not looking particularly bad, I have to say. The blade's a little bit oily, but the case itself doesn't look oily. So I've got to clean all these components down with some naphtha. Just take those two screws away. The blades here, you can see they're sticking to that plate. Looking at it, the pivots for that particular pivot was sticking in the case. Now you can see there's obvious corrosion on the blade at this point. Suggests that the shutter has been, because it's very localised, because the corrosion's very localised, it's much more likely the camera was splashed and a drop of water got inside the shutter. If the corrosion is mild and it's very widespread and it's all fairly even over the whole shutter, then that's much more likely that the corrosion was due to improper storage, that the camera had been stored somewhere in a humid atmosphere or somewhere cold and damp. But in this case I think the corrosion on that blade suggests that the shutter's been splashed. Anyway, all these parts have got to be cleaned and then I can reassemble it. So did that diaphragm blade clean up? Well, there's a typical diaphragm blade from this particular shutter, and here's the one that had that nasty rust patch on it, and I've cleaned that. I've scraped off that rust with the tip of a screwdriver. I've polished that with Brasso and it's looking much better. You can still see the pattern from corrosion on there, but there's no reason to believe that that won't move smoothly in the shutter as you adjust the aperture setting. It should be no worse than the other blades in that position. So there's my blades cleaned, and now of course I've got to assemble the diaphragm mechanism. But these are the components here that I need to get in place, and of course the settings lever goes on last of all. So I'll get ready to do this. Here's the plate, ready to have the blades assembled to it. This side has the residual marks from where the two screws held it into the case, so I know that goes down on my jig, faces in towards the shutter. This faces to the back of the shutter and to the diaphragm blades. And I can fit my blades in position on the plate, get their pivot rivet in position, and these are assembled anti-clockwise, stacked one on top of the other until you get round to the first position, and then you have to swing the first blades out of position, outwards, to uncover the holes you need for the last few blades. These blades are reasonably flat. Blades that have had significant contamination with oil are often bowed up because they've been distorted and the forces applied to the blades to open or close the aperture. And if that has happened, the blades don't lie flat again afterwards because they're quite springy metal, and it makes reassembling the diaphragm much trickier. See, I've got to swing these first blades back out of the way to uncover the pivot holes for these last few blades. In this particular shutter there was, I've knocked that and I'll bet I've disturbed half the blades. Let's get that one back in position. This particular shutter, there was some corrosion on the pivots. We know one of the blades had a significant patch of corrosion on it, and that almost certainly was the result of the camera having been splashed. The corrosion on the pivots may relate to the same event, or that could be, because it's very generalised, that could be the result of poor storage, or even the camera having been put away damp after it had been splashed in its leather case. I'm going to swing these blades inwards. Without disturbing their pivots where they are fitted into this plate. That looks hopeful. Now here's our setting lever. This is the ring, the moving ring that the setting lever couples to. I've got to get my alignment of this correct, so I need to check closely to make sure I've got that right. I'm fairly confident that my setting ring goes on here. See if I can get these blades, the pivots seated in these slots. Putting some light weight on this plate while I manipulate these blades around. They're all sitting in there, but they don't seem to be sitting dead flat. I think one of the pivots is not correctly in place in the case. I'll discover that shortly when I put the case on there and try to fit it all in place. And the case goes on here. I'll flip that over, lift the outside piece off my jig, flip it over there so I can see it. There are two holes where the screws held the plate to the case. And they are here. It looks like one of the pivots is not sitting in the hole correctly. I can probably manipulate that in. That'll be because I bumped that plate while I was placing the blades. Get that screw started. I'm just checking. Yeah, I can see that the pivot at this point is not sitting correctly in place, and that one there's maybe not correct either. That one's certainly in. This one here, not quite yet. Tighten those screws down a little bit. One of these pivots is not in the hole. It's this one. See if I can push it over. Yeah, that's it. It's in place. It just dropped into place. Now, if I move the settings ring here, the blade should swing in and out smoothly. And they do. So that means I can fit my settings lever on the back. And where's the hole I need to do that through? Is that it? There and there. That looks correct. Okay. So I'll clean up my setting lever and get this done.